people who are on the verge of abandoning those projects. Where do we stand with regard to those projects? And while I am here on this, sir, I think at some stage when time permits, the government should agree. The Supreme Court has pronounced one view on how natural resources are to be distributed or allotted. I think we need a thorough debate in this House, from 2G to power blocks, to coal blocks, I'm sorry. We need to consider as to how the country must have a policy with regard to distribution of natural resources, so that we have a transparent policy. We have natural resources available at least to the actual users at a price which is predetermined, whether market or by indexation. And I think we need a thorough debate, which has so far not taken place as far as this House is concerned, sir. We recently saw the poverty figures, sir. And there was this great achievement that between 2004 and 5, the poverty figures between 9 and 10, that is 5 years, have come down by 7.3%. The Planning Commission seems to have given a nod to accepting the formulation of the Tendulkar Committee. Then reports have appeared that this is on basis of changing the goalpost. That if rupees 32, which was once considered curiously enough to take a man out of poverty, has now become rupees 28. And now it appears, sir, that while calculating this figure of 7.3%, I'm sure the Finance Minister will get into this question. The schemes such as the midday meal scheme, which are external aids to remove poverty, have been taken into consideration in order to determine the decline. So these are people who still don't have enough to feed themselves, they are still poor, but because of schemes like this, external aids like this, if they have enough to feed them, then I'm not so sure whether that's a correct calculation. I'll stand corrected if my impression is inaccurate. Agriculture, sir, faces various challenges. The cultivable land area is declining, the population is increasing. Fortunately, we had a very good harvest this year. But then input costs have gone up hugely. Power costs have gone up, fertilizer has gone up, seeds has gone up. And today, you have various kinds of problems. When you had a shortage, you had a problem of a shortage. I was looking at the comments made in the economic survey. If we see from page 181 onwards, it deals with agriculture. At page 184, it speaks in terms of changing eating habits of people. And therefore, when we determine the MSPs, we have to take that into consideration so that the farmer is incentivized to move in alternate direction because of changing eating habits of people. Then it speaks in terms of both availability and cost of power. At page 197, it gives the details of procurement, month-wise. And because we had a very good harvest, we have the problem of plenty now. Almost at various periods, the amount of buffer stock required, we've had 1.5 to 2 times or even more. And therefore, you have the problem of rotting grains because enough storage is not being built up. Now, these are all areas which are matters of serious concern. You now have a proposal in the budget where the amount meant for crop insurance has actually come down. So schemes like Manrega, however useful and sacrosanct they are, I think also require to be revisited from time to time. This year you have reduced the allocation from 40,000 crores to 33,000 crores. It's down by 7,000 crores. It's an employment giving scheme. It's meant to be a livelihood scheme. But it is not necessary that a livelihood scheme should never be an asset creating scheme. There is no contradiction between the two. We somehow seem to be moving on a premise that because it's a livelihood scheme, it need not be an asset creating scheme. Indefinitely, you can't have a scheme where you dig pits and fill them up and say we have created jobs. Who prevents us from continuing with Narega and linking it? One area is your water bodies, where something is being done, but with various kinds of infrastructural activities. We can have the same labor with probably a higher payment, with some better training, so that we are creating an asset in the process also. There is no contradiction between an asset creation and a livelihood scheme. So far what appears is that we have kept it as a livelihood scheme, and we are finding that the utility is restricted. There is a lot of leakage which takes place. For instance, there was one report, and I believe it was a correct report, from April to December 2011, the average rate of employment in Narega and the payment was 32 days. Therefore, the utility of the scheme will also decline and deplete. So let us be progressive and think it in terms of advancing it as a livelihood scheme, but link it with some activity where the leakage is less and where some element of infrastructure creation takes place. Sir, I have said this in his house earlier, and I am saying it again. The finance minister in his budget speech at page 7 has spoken in terms of providing tax certainty. He says this in the context of the advanced pricing agreements. Now, tax certainty is essential for any taxation planning. So when investors come in, they must know how much tax they are going to pay if they earn money. When a domestic investor takes up a project, he must know for what period he has a rebate, for what period he has to pay. This whole concept of retrospective planning, which finance minister after finance minister have resorted to, you're not the first one, you won't be the last one. But I think at some stage we must consider that this is modern age of tax planning. Is it fair to impose taxes retrospectively or change legislations retrospectively? Assessments have been closed. People have planned their businesses and their personal incomes accordingly. And therefore, this is an issue which is both domestically and internationally, from an investment environment, not sending the correct signal. Sir, the issue of service tax. The finance minister has formulated a principle that all services are going to be taxed this time, except those which are on the negative list. Sir, I have 3 points to make on this regard. Please don't look at the budget only as a revenue-raising exercise. It's an economic policy document which has to further the Indian economy. And therefore, if you impose excessive tax burdens, as I said, on all activity, from what I earn to what I spend to what I eat to what I wear and where I live and where I drive, you are taxing every activity 365 days, 24/7. Now, 12% is excessive. You have brought in all services. Therefore, the finance minister should seriously reconsider. This will have an inflationary burden. The second, there is no provision in the Constitution with regard to service tax. Therefore, it obviously comes in the residuary entry, which is your power of the central government. Now, services which are otherwise within the domain of the states are now being taxed by the Center for Service Tax. The states have no power to levy service tax, the centre has, because of the list 1 entry 97, your residuary entry. Now, when you are taxing services of the state, are you going to compensate the states accordingly? And sir, my third point, a lesser point, but something at least which defies my intellect. I have gone through this negative list. As a student of law and taxation, sir, I have learned that even illegal activities can be taxed. So if somebody earns money through smuggling, he'll still have to pay income tax. But illegal activities are normally not to be granted exemptions. So in your list of 17, you have curiously exempted from service tax betting, gambling and lottery. Lottery is lawful, but the other two, I think, really need to be discouraged. They need not be incentivized by providing them on the negative list and say betting and gambling will also be exempted as far as taxes are concerned, sir. Sir, with regard to the rights of the states, I have one or two brief submissions. You enacted a constitutional amendment giving a right to education. The states are saying who's going to fund it. Your initial proposal was that 75% will come from the center, 25% will be given by the states. The states were finding it difficult. In your expenditure budget, at page 202, I find this time that 75-25, then it came down, and now it is going to become 50-50. So the moment it becomes 50-50, the states are already starved of funds, and they're going to find it extremely difficult as to how to fund this. So we will have a constitutional amendment which gives a fundamental right of education, at least primary education. A fundamental right is one which can always be enforced. But when somebody asks for an enforcement, we will say we don't have the funds. Therefore, when we think in terms of popular slogans, we must chew as much as we can swallow. And therefore, when you thought in terms of granting this as a fundamental right, it was an enforceable right. You should have the ways and means and the funds in order to implement and enforce that right. So if the share of the states is going to go down, you will now have a serious difficulty. So the oil prices will face another increase because the crude oil cess goes up from 2,500 per metric ton to 4,500 per metric ton. You've anticipated in this budget, and this will create a problem with your fiscal deficit. In the earlier year, you got an advantage because of the 3G auction. This year, 122 licenses have been cancelled by the Supreme Court. So you have some surplus 2G spectrum. You also have to charge people for what they got in excess of 6.4 megahertz. Now you have anticipated that some 58,217 crores will come from this auction. At that time, 2G had a great value. But once 3G is already in the market and 4G is about to come, I am at least keeping my fingers crossed as to whether the kind of monies you have anticipated, I hope and pray you are able to raise them, but I am not so sure whether now, with 3G already in the market and 4G likely to come, whether the old 3G which will come from these 122 licenses will fetch you the same kind of values. So there is one, and this is the last amongst the key points I have to make. You have amended the Customs Act. And in the Customs Act, you have amended section 104. Now, there was a time when this country faced with great smuggling, violation of customs duty, and therefore there was to conserve foreign exchange, we had laws, we have preventive detention, we used to put people in jail. Suddenly, today the business environment has changed, but we still need to be vigilant. I don't know who has suggested, and the reason for it, that 104 is being amended. Customs offences beyond 3 years made non-bailable. All right, even in a non-bailable offence, a person will go and ask for bail. As it is, sir, we were earlier told, as young students of law, that the rule is bail and not jail. The kind of environment in the media and the courts which has been created, the principle seems to have been reversed. Now we have to seriously consider as to what kind of a society we want to make, even with regard to offenders. Now you have brought in a provision, please see in the finance bill, the provision which you have brought with regard to section 104. You now say, when a person applies for bail, no judge will give him bail. The judge will issue a notice to the public prosecutor. Either the public prosecutor has to give his consent, or the public prosecutor has to say, I am convinced that this man is innocent, not guilty. Otherwise, there will be no bail. Sir, this provision existed in Pota and Tada. And that is why they said in Pota and Tada there was no bail. Your government, when it repealed Pota and Tada, and when Mr. Chidambaram brought back amendments to the Unlawful Activities Act, one of the areas where we said was, at least for terrorism, keep this provision. And you said no. You are a different government, we are a very liberal government. We want easy bail provisions for terrorists. So you said we will only have the normal bail provision for terrorists. And now for suddenly you have slipped into the budget that in Customs Act, the bail provisions of Pota and Tada will apply. So please don't, let's move in a direction where anybody, there may be a dispute of valuation, there may be a genuine case of evasion. But then the proportionality of the offense and the manner in which the law deals with him, there must be some nexus between the two. You have brought in a disproportionate provision. You don't need a hammer to kill a fly. And therefore a provision of this kind, which you said should not even apply to terrorists, you will say now in customs offences these provisions will apply. And slowly once you do it in customs offences, in every economic offence it will start applying. And I can tell you, sir, there is no better advice you can give to the Indian business than this. Don't invest in India, because if you do, these are going to be the consequences. Please seriously reconsider this. Every law has to be reasonable. People who violate customs law must be dealt with. But they must be dealt with proportionately. They can't be dealt with a law which was considered even harsh for terrorists by your government. And therefore, please reconsider these factors. In the end, sir, my appeal to the Honorable Finance Minister is, I quite sympathize with the situation on two counts. He's planning the national economy in a difficult environment. Somebody else decides the expenditure and he has to collect the taxes. There is a political environment which is not very conducive to a building of a consensus. These are the challenges before him. But at least make this budget economy and business friendly. Today, nobody in the world, not one man has got the right signal from this budget. So please reconsider some of your provisions so that we can really help the economy in moving faster. I thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.